Naina, thanks so much for joining me today. You know, you've had a stellar career. You've been a trailblazer, and that's putting it mildly. So I'm going to start by asking you, it's tough to actually identify milestones in a career. But what would your milestones be, looking back?
You know, I think when I think back, I think the big milestones are events and times where decisions have come my way. I think one which was important was that first big promotion when I took over as head of investment banking for Grindlays Bank. And it was a big one because I had been in the organization 6 years, 7 years. I had headed 2 of the offices by then, the 2 big ones, Mumbai, Delhi. I had delivered, but it was still a step change for the organization in that I was taking over from someone who was 12 years older. So we were still living in a time where hierarchy and years in the organization counted. And that I was fortunate to catch the organization at a time when it was flipping from that thinking to more of a meritocracy. And with a little push from myself, I must admit, but that they gave me the role at a time when, frankly, it need not have happened. And so it got me into a leadership role very early, and that platform then became a very important one going forward. And this was way back now in '89. When I took over as head of that investment bank, which was one of the big foreign investment banks, or biggest in fact at the time. That helped me as a milestone to leverage that experience, which when Morgan Stanley then came to India and, being an investment banker, the desire to work with a bulge bracket firm, that too in India where I wanted to be, was an opportunity that presented itself when India opened up in 91, 92. So I was kind of ready for that transition, and it was therefore that milestone that enabled me to move to set up the Morgan Stanley office in India and head that operation in the country. So that was, I think, good fortune, luck, right timing, right place, and reasonable performance behind me. I think the other one which really goes to show how often it is the men who we work for, the men in our lives who allow us to move ahead. So I'm certainly one who, very grateful I have a husband who supports me, a father who mentored me, and that I've had great male bosses. I've actually never had a female boss who put their faith in me. And so that next milestone would have probably been when I, after having headed the investment bank at Grindlays, in fact, looked to a move which would make me more ready to become sort of a CEO of the bank, as against just in the investment banking world, and put my hand up to move to retail banking. And the organization was really surprised because they thought I would, always stick with corporate banking, and why did I want this move? And I could see the disbelief on their faces, and I didn't think they would give me the role. And then one day I get called in by the country head, he was an Australian guy, I remember very well, Bob Edgar, calls me in and says, hey, how about a role as head of NRI services? We want to open up the NRI operations of the bank, and it's a natural place for us to be. And it was actually an ideal role for me because that meant I was going to be able to open up offices around the world, bring the non-resident Indian money into Grindlays. But I had discovered really just the previous day that I was pregnant. Okay. Now, here I was in a job that's going to require me to travel around the world, and I have no idea, absolutely no idea whether I'm going to be able to do it physically, because I had no idea what being pregnant was about. And when he confronted me, I couldn't say yes because I was so confused, and I asked for time, and I think he was surprised because he thought I would jump at the opportunity. And so I rolled back into his office the next day, having reflected on it, and told him, look, I've discovered I'm pregnant. I have no idea what this means. I have no idea whether I can do the role or not, but you should just know it. And it was his turn to really be surprised. I could sit in silence, which must have lasted an hour as far as I was concerned. And then he looked me straight in the face and said, well, tell me, what would you like to do? And I said, I'd love to take the chance. And so he said, well, the job's yours. Now, the faith that he put in me, and if I think about it, that experience in retail banking stood me in very good stead when I came into HSBC, looking for a role now again as head of the bank rather than just in the corporate banking, investment banking world, leveraging that strength when moving into a CEO role. And the fact that I had retail banking experience behind me of that ilk was really important. So these milestones sometimes are very critical.
Sure.
And I got that advantage 20 years later. That I could talk about retail banking experience 20 years later when I was being considered for a role as CEO of a different bank. So I think these early milestones are very important. Those milestones become less important once you arrive, because then you have far more latitude and far more experience behind you.
Nena, you were the first woman to go to Harvard and pass out of there. I want to ask you, looking back at your journey, what were the influences or factors that allowed you to follow your heart and really make a mark in investment banking? Because a few women had gone in there, or it was all a new area. And what then are the ingredients of a successful career, according to you?
So I do think the education I received was very important. Essentially grounded in India, but the MBA at Harvard Business School opened my eyes to a whole new way of learning. Learning under pressure, delivering under pressure. But the biggest learning, I think, was the confidence I get from having been in an institution which is global, with people who are the best in the world, and being able to hold one's own there. And that confidence and self-confidence becomes very important at every stage of one's career, particularly those early years when you have to stand up and speak your mind, when you have to analyze, when you actually find that that point you were about to make but were holding back, someone else makes it and gets the accolades, and you're like, well, I should just learn to believe my intuition, my thoughts, and get that out rather than think 100 times on whether it's right or wrong. So it's articulation, and it's all these soft traits. Is it what I learned in econometrics and what I learned about competitive strategy from Michael Porter? All of that was important, yes, but those learnings change over time. What doesn't change is your ability to learn, your ability to soak up information, analyze it, and in fact, your ability to then articulate it, present it, and the confidence with which you forge ahead in your career. So I think if you look at education or that base that we get as a time to acquire skills for learning and continuous learning, I think that has got to be the most important part of what stands you in good stead as you go ahead, and it certainly did help me.
You are one of the pioneers in the investment banking space, and you, as you rightly said, you have transformed, looked at retail. And then you headed HSBC, and now you're, on the board of HSBC Asia Pacific, etc. I want to ask you, how do you see the banking landscape change, Nena? Because Indians have done so well globally in the banking space. What has allowed them to do so well, and how are you seeing the landscape changing?
So, two different questions there. I think Indians do well across the world because we integrate well into societies around the world. Our English skills, our ability to really be good team players and work in all kinds of cultural setups. So you have Indians today in Asian organizations, in multinationals around the world, and leading, as you rightly point out, some of the largest, in fact, Fortune 500 companies as well. So I think that comes both from our base education, which much as we deride it, obviously is giving us some very strong skills, and the competitive nature of our education, I think, also hones our skills to excel and succeed. And then off that background, the softer skills in terms of personality and things as well. And at the end of the day, success begets success in that when there are enough Indians out there succeeding, I do believe boards stop looking at the fact that you're Indian. They just look at someone who's the right skill because actually they've seen enough other Indians or worked with them elsewhere and recognize that it's really not an issue in terms of being able to lead a multinational. What does help is if India is a big market for that company, because at the back of your mind, even if that Indian has not been in India, the fact that Asia is a big focus, India within that is a focus, can also help. So I think it's a mix of things, but Indians will certainly do very well in a global setup, irrespective of where the economy or where India is today, because of these other traits rather than just the India performance. You asked about the banking landscape, and I think the banking landscape today in India is very exciting because it is beginning to converge with other sectors. So you see the telecom players coming into payments, you see microfinance, which is akin to banking but different, quite different in its model, moving into banking. You find the Internet of Things beginning to really impose itself through the e-commerce platforms, which are clearly, again, looking at a very different delivery model to consumers. So the change therein, I think, is really significant, and in countries like ours, the whole financial inclusion bit, which has not been natural to many banks, but the push therefore to go down to levels which don't look like they are cost effective. So we are being forced to find solutions to include a huge base of the pyramid in the country in a manner which we have not done, are very significant changes. So, I mean, if you look at the Jan Dhan Yojana scheme of the government and the push that it has required all the banks, particularly the public sector banks, in terms of coverage, and are they going to be able to do it, as in bank accounts have been opened, but do it effectively? What are the costs for them, and what is the revenue model? Are going to be very significant challenges, and solutions will have to be found. Likewise, the mobile companies, as they come into moving of cash, what is that model going to look like? And in many of these cases, these are not large revenue earners, as in profit earners.
In a country like India, technology is really changing things very rapidly. Do you think the next leg of the banking evolution will be driven by technology, by data analytics? And at HSBC, for instance, which is, which prides itself on calling itself the world's local bank, how do you amalgamate it, and how do you keep pace with the change in technology?
Technology is beginning to mean different things in different markets. I mean, if you look at the need in markets like ours and other emerging markets, technology is about the low-cost provision to the base of the pyramid, because that indeed is where there's a lot of underbanking. Or it is about provision to corporates, local corporates going offshore, which is again a very different model where you're really covering trade flows. Technology in a developed market is quite different. So I think the difference now is that you can have technology solutions, and in fact in the case of multinationals, what happens is you need to have a technology solution across markets because you want it to be one bank. However, the need is actually much more disaggregation of technology, because you need innovation in different markets as a response to different things. So if you look at the fleet-footedness of banks like ICICI in trial and error, the way they will work with new products which are outsourced, guys who haven't developed it within the bank but may have developed it outside, but bring those technologies over, and the ability to then sort of stick it into their system. That flexibility is very interesting. So the smaller you are, the easier it is. The more anchored in one market you are, the more likely you are to innovate and find the technology solutions for that market. So I think you do get that nimble-footedness and a much more of a domestic technology play than a global multinational play.
Do you think youngsters are skilled enough to understand the nuances of this fast-changing, technological revolution that's driving banking? And what are the need gaps you see when you see different cadres come up the ranks?
So I think younger people are actually far better suited to it than an older team, because they by nature are restless, looking for change, new ideas. The ability to reinvent yourself is much greater with a younger, hungry employee base. To spot the changes, you learn in different ways. You learn, of course, from what you know and what you choose to teach yourself through, self-learning off the internet, however. But you learn a lot from the friends around you. So if you're a young person, I think if you're lucky enough to have people in the e-commerce space, people in different industries around you, quite different to where you are, and you actually spend your time understanding what they're doing, that learning is so significant because it keeps you in touch with what is happening around you, which is far more significant than just trying to pick it up yourself, because you would tend to just zero in very narrow spaces which you think that are relevant to you, not realizing that the world is converging around you.
Let's come back to your own journey. Very often in an interview like this, you talk about the good things, right? But I'm going to ask you, what's a mistake that you learned from? Was there ever a time when you questioned what you were doing? You were so down and out, you said, this is not happening, or you were tempted to move out. Has there been any moment like that?
Oh, there are moments like this all the time. They can happen because one takes a wrong call. And there are definitely times when you think, hey, I'm just not going to be able to crack through this one, because you've taken a call and you're too far down it to change. So absolutely, but I think the ability to recognize you're wrong and just make a clean breast of it with your team, say, hey guys, I think we took a wrong call on this one, I led you down this one, let's just take a deep breath and figure out where we are. And once it's out of you, in fact, it's so easy because actually everyone around you was probably thinking the same and hadn't maybe told you. And now they rally around to sort through it. And actually, I have found that sometimes those points of inflection are some of the best, because the learnings are so huge that what you reinvent yourself into can be absolutely the next generation thing. So I think, perennially questioning, encouraging your team to question you is very, very important. So one of the rules that I have clearly come to abide by is make sure that your top team is not a yes man team, that it is a team that will debate, question healthily, question each other, and through that debate and discussion you take care of a lot of the issues that could be there. So what emanates is actually the right things. Ultimately, you do, when you get a divided house, have to, as a leader, take a choice. And those are the tough times. Do you go with it or not? But I would spend a little time trying to persuade the team to rally around completely with the arguments, etc. And sometimes you just have to take the call and take the plunge.
Right. Yeah. What's the proudest moment been on the flip side? I mean, you've had many milestones, so what has been the one thing that, you look back and said, I couldn't imagine I was here, but I have come here and it's been amazing?
Yeah. I think, I would actually say it was the early wins, because it was almost a bit of, hey, I can't believe it's happened to me. So the first time I took over as head of investment banking, it would be the first time that I actually even headed the division, so even before heading the investment bank. So 3 years into a career, head of the North India operations of investment banking for Grindlays, happened sooner than I had thought. So those early wins, because they were the sort of first reaffirmations, you're really not sure of yourself, you don't know if the organization is going to support you, and I think those would have been the proudest moments. But with each, I think sometimes the pride comes not from one's own career, but also reveling in the success of others, that someone you mentored reached where they did. And it's a great feeling that you had put your faith in the right person. And you revel in others' successes, people who have supported you, but people who have grown beyond you. So life is fortunately made up of a lot of proud moments which make you feel good about being on the right track. Yeah.
As you go ahead into career, Naina, you also need to constantly reskill yourself. Because especially in a place like HSBC, where you can be thrown into different geographies, different businesses, etc. How should people be pacing that? And what is the talent gap that you see as this new cadre comes up? Because banks are growing rapidly, the need for more people is huge.
So you hit the nail on the head. It is about reskilling. The person who thinks they know everything and know it all are never going to go ahead, because organizations just keep changing and revamping. So the ability to learn and apply that knowledge across the board, to move from different areas, albeit related, is a very important skill. And the reskilling comes from we do a lot of e-learning programs, for example, at the bank. So you're sort of encouraged to teach yourself. There are, of course, classroom type courses, but it doesn't stop you from asking to go to a program that you feel will help you when you have your sort of annual review of where you're at and where your next sort of career moves are. So I think recognizing your own shortcomings and your desire to learn becomes very, very important. The organization helps you and you have to help yourself. And that reskilling, therefore, is very, very critical. I also think that one should not hesitate to sometimes apply one's skills in a whole different area. So what I mean by that is that you could have been in mobile telephony, but you move into the banking world in order to learn that, so that you can marry these skills in a converging environment so that you are actually quite unique in what emerges. So you can do it across organizations.
The question to that is the traditional, image of a banker who's just a numbers person or looking at project finance, etc., changed dramatically because of the changes. Because now you have data analytics. I know you have a huge number of data points that you can gauge and study. So how is that changing?
I think the change there is you will find more people coming into banking with possibly experience in the real world. Because if you are going to be, for example, in the PE space, which is related in the financial sector, if you brought with it some experience of startups, if you're going to be investing in them, I think it would be helpful. If you're in the project finance space, maybe not experience outside of banking, but within banking. If you've come with an investment banking experience or corporate banking, it helps you in project finance. So I think lateral experience that is related is always helpful because it brings a different perspective. But there will always be room for specialists. So for someone who's really good at what they do and they've come through a very traditional sort of space, grown up through investment banking till you reach the top, that model will also stay. It's not as if we want everybody looking the same. But I think what is happening at the top table is we're looking for more variety. And it's not just diversity by gender, just more diversity, period, in thinking, in ideas. And for that, you need people with different skills. So you tend to look for someone who brings a little something that is different. A classic would be, say, in marketing, in banking. Many of the marketing heads that I have worked with did not grow up in banking. They came, if we were looking at a big retail banking push, the need to have someone who had worked in the FMCG marketing space was extremely useful. So the head of marketing we hired at the time came from a background in Unilever, in levers in fact, with a view to bringing perspectives on how do you analyze and understand data and customer insights and fashion your banking products to suit the customer. So these sort of experiences will depend also at the point of time that you identify a need which is of value or use to you.
So would you say that to succeed in your career, continuous learning is imperative, especially at the pace at which things are changing?
Absolutely, and the pace of continuous learning has changed because you have to keep up. And I think the other thing which is so critical is staying abreast of developments. So one is learning, where you're actually sort of educating yourself, but the other is just general knowledge. And I fear a young generation that doesn't read the papers, that is doing very random sort of searches on the internet, is not going to be good enough. That the ability to understand what is happening around you, the traditional knowledge we got from the newspapers, it's just that there's more of it now. But just staying abreast of developments, which is really, I think, much easier today because you have technology available to you on the push of a button and it's right there on your screen, is quite important. So to recognize what those spaces are and stay in touch would be very, very critical.
Coming back to your journey, congratulations on the book you wrote, which is really coming together of a lot of learnings from different women. I'm going to ask you, especially as a woman, often questions are asked about work-life balance, Naina. What are your learnings on this? And do you think women don't try hard enough to really make both work to succeed?
Yeah, so it's a very tough question, Minnie, because I think it's a very personal one. I think there is no one answer because everyone has to find their own solution, their own balance. And at different points of time, different things are more important to a person over another. And therefore for every individual to determine this. I think the answer has to be that you love your work, and you love it with a passion that you really don't want to give it up, and God forbid, if you have to, you're going to be a monster at home because you're going to hold it against somebody that you had to. And the other is, you definitely want to have that family. And then you look at these two, and I like to refer to these as two crystal balls that you want to keep in the air, that you can't let them fall to the ground because they will shatter. And you just learn to juggle the two of them. What you do give up is a lot of me time. And I treat that like a rubber ball, one which, you let drop, it bounces around, and you pick it up when you have the time. So you do give up something, but then you can't sit there despairing about, oh, I can't do this, can't do that. You know that you can't do everything, and you take the choices as you go. Do women try hard enough to find this? I think women are so consumed by guilt about the family. We fret about the fact that we cannot spend time with our ailing mother. We fret about the time that we're not home with the children. Men don't fret as much. Men have the same work-life balance issues, just that they don't fret that much and they aren't consumed by that guilt. Now, is that guilt imposed on us because of society's expectations of us, or our own expectations of what we think we should be doing or being? Is something which, we have to, whichever way it's caused it, come to terms with. So I think it's more the guilt. The ability to do both exists. Many women have shown the way, and some have made personal choices. Some stepped out of the workplace to look after homes. Some chose not to have families. No decision is right or wrong, as long as you're happy with the decision you made.
Last two questions. The first is that across your career, I know you are a role model for many people, but who's been your role model through the different phases? And what are the traits that you really like in a person, or a leadership trait that you really like and you have tried to imbibe?
So, I have found role models in the most unusual places sometimes. Age 16, 17, reading books which had strong protagonists. It was very fashionable to read Ayn Rand and Simone de Beauvoir, and those influences, and I was a big reader, were huge in that they had women very central to, and fairly liberated women at the center of that. So I think that influence was clearly there. I came from a family where none of the women worked, so it certainly wasn't from the family around me. I read books about Golda Meir, Prime Minister of Israel, but yes, it was fascinating to have insights into strong women such as this. I think later it was, so I wouldn't say any one. You find a boss who you like and it was typically a male boss, but and somebody who you think got it. You picked up those traits as something that you would emulate. Equally, there were things you didn't like and you sort of pushed them away. So I think we grow up to be an amalgam of all the things we imbibe from around us. And some of them can come, as in my case, also from an executive assistant I had. Bombay was burning, trains being burnt, and everyone had been told, please don't even think about trying to get to the office, no risks to be taken. And lo and behold, my assistant arrives in the office, coming through trains which had just begun operating on routes which trains had been bombed and put on fire. And she's enough, and I'm like, why are you here? And she leaves a kid behind with a neighbor because her maid hasn't arrived because of these problems. And she's like, I knew you'd be at work and I thought you needed me. And I was like, my God, I thought 3 times about leaving my home, living much closer, driving myself to work in a car. She's had to come on public transport. She's like, who am I to even think twice about whether I should be at work or not? So you find this amazing commitment to work comes from someone who you then use as a role model, as, hey, that's an example that even would I have come to work in the circumstances? Probably not. But this woman's commitment to work was such that, is this something that I should emulate? And I think you find this around you all the time. And in my case, it's always particularly women at Seva, who as self-employed women, how they have embraced livelihood and actually contributed to their families through a system which is not helpful in terms of society, and how they bring change and you see the adversity in which they rise and what they create for themselves, and you wonder, hey, who am I to even think that what I am doing is in any way different or better to what they do. So I think we should just look for the role models around us. There are hundreds of them. The ability of people to give, to share, and those sort of qualities are immense, and tremendous role models around us.
What would your advice be, Dana, to anybody who's aspiring to be where you are, and who's ambitious, wants to work hard? What would your advice be?
Just make sure you have fun along the way, because if you enjoy your work, you're passionate about your work, you have fun. You don't have fun 100% of the time. There's always things you don't like to do. But at the end of the day, if you recognize that you enjoy it enough to make sure that it works for you, it gives you everything you need in terms of staying the course. Because ambition, being competitive, all of that is good. It keeps you on track as long as you make sure that those traits work in the right way, that they don't have the negative side of it, over ambition, over competitiveness, about killing the person around you, is not the right way. But if you inherently have those traits in you, they'll propel you as you go ahead. So keep that balance. But at the end of the day, if you aren't enjoying yourself, you're going to be a monster to yourself and also to everyone around you. Yeah.
And last one, really, UpGrad is trying to get a lot of the continuous learning online, encourage people to, reskill themselves and really live up to their own potential and the possibilities. What would your message be to UpGrad? And in the theme of online education, what would your thoughts be?
I think it's just fantastic that the ability to reach out to so many more people in the way, in a much more youthful way, quite honestly. I think the phase where you just sat in a class, you're kind of done with. I've had kids who come to me saying that they didn't want to take the admission they got to Harvard Business School because they were beyond now going to class at 8 and having to attend 3 classes till 3. They couldn't get up till 1. And these are brilliant people, gold medalists, etc. And they were so frank about, hey, this just doesn't work for me. So the ability to work when you want, study when you want, imbibe in the way you want, and to have it there for you is really amazing. And there are cost issues too. I mean, this is a much more low-cost delivery model than anything about going to a class in itself. So I would like to believe it's a mix. The continuous learning that comes from this opportunity is huge, and then you go do some sort of classroom model stuff, because it's nice to also have people around you, and you create a cohort of people who you then also engage with and stay engaged with through your life, and do it as a mix. So I think many organizations, many universities are evolving to these models, and it's wonderful that we have this available to us in country in the way that UpGrad is putting this together.
Thank you so much.